Welcome, everybody, to our 12th Personal Histories discussion conversation. We're very happy to have you all here today, and because we have a very special friend and guest. The purpose of doing this is to expand our community and recognize not only all of us as a body, but that there are some amazing individuals amongst us, probably all of you here, who have very interesting histories and interesting lives. So we've had this series, and each one very distinctive based on the individual that's being interviewed, and the tones and ideas and revelations and all have been extremely various through the years. Today we have David Bennett, a good friend, member of the Society, one of the founding figures in the international effort of adolescent health care, a major figure in developing adolescent health in Australia, and a person that has a very interesting, diverse background, one of which you've already been sensing, and that is his musical history has been insinuated through his whole career, and that will be an emphasis in our discussion. And as is traditional, I like to start with something about history and to know about your family history in Australia and about your grandparents and your parents, if you can start with that.
Okay, well, as per your suggestion, Dick, I've come with a blank mind, so...
That's it.
I gave my notes to you and you've not given them
I have
back,
my notes. I have them all right here.
I was born in Brisbane, in Queensland in Australia, and my mother and father had both been born in Brisbane, and the two families had come from far afield. My mother's parents had come from, their father from England. He'd actually been hijacked onto a ship and kidnapped and brought to Australia, and he married the youngest of 10 children in a Queensland town, and my mother was born there as well. My father's parents came from Europe originally. I think they were Australian born, but most of our ancestors are from Eastern Europe. And then as a young child, I was young. I was nerdy. I think the very first appendage to my body, apart from what was already there when I was born, was my glasses. And I have memories as a young child of being bashed up because I was a nerdy kid with glasses. And on occasion they would say, "Tell us your plans." And on one such occasion I came home with 2 broken teeth and a broken pair of spectacles because I hadn't any plans, and they were not happy that I had no plans. So my early childhood was happy. I had a younger brother who was born 3 years later than me. And he's been a joy throughout our life. He's a musician as well. He's a violinist. So we grew up making music together.
And then there's a musical tradition in your family in a variety of ways, I think, isn't there?
Very much so. It comes particularly down through my father's family. His mother was a pianist, probably of concert piano standard. I heard her play once she was already senile and living with us. She just sat down at the piano once and rattled off a Chopin etude. I just couldn't quite believe it, but she was a wonderful pianist. She wasn't allowed to go away because she didn't make the 100% in her exam. But her husband, her name was Ernestine, and her husband, whose name was Ferdinand Bennett, was the sort of old-style pianist who played mood music in silent movies. But he was a banger, and she'd never play with him, apparently. But that's where it comes from. And my father, who was a commercial artist, was also a self-taught pianist. And my envy of him was that he played by ear, and he had this alphabetical notation, so he could hear a piece of music and write it down as letters of the alphabet, and then just go and sit down and improvise it. And he would occasionally put the back of a record up on the piano and just work his way down through the songs from his memory of them. So he was really very interested in the jazz tradition and introduced me to people like Errol Garner, whom I actually saw play in Atlanta when I was here.
Really?
Oscar Peterson came to Australia. I kept worrying that he was going to die because he was overweight, and he didn't ever die at the time. He died.
And you started on piano early. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, about 7 years of age, and that was about the appropriate time to play, to start. A very great joy. In fact, I can remember to be threatened with cessation of piano lessons was probably the biggest threat that could be made. I just loved to go. I had an original teacher by the name of Miss Henderson who taught me my original little pieces. And then I ended up in the hands of a very wonderful musician, an organist and jazz pianist by the name of Robert Bowden, whom I think is still alive, well in his 80s, in Brisbane. And he encouraged me along a slightly different line. And then I was handed over to someone else later.
Yeah. And you have an early piece that you still possess that you could play for us?
Well, that's right. I mean, when we discussed this a year ago, I thought you were joking when you said, I'm going to bring a piano along, because that had never happened before, but he was dead serious. So I did think back, and the idea was to wonder, you know, what were some of the musical highlights and milestones for me. And one was the first piece that I thought was a really proper piece. So at about the age of 10 or 11, I learned a piece by an Australian composer called Lindley Evans. His name was Lindley Evans, and the piece was Tally Ho, which I'll play for you. I want to dedicate it to my very dear friend Richard Mackenzie, who's a horseman, as you know.
Nice.
So I'll play this.
Okay. So we can pass it around. You can see. I think I'm blue.
Thank you, Bob, for the $1 that came to be. This has got hunting overtones.
You can stay there. You can stay. Oh yeah, bow. Yeah. Oh, that's just what a fanfare and a good way to begin. Just wonderful.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. And then we had another crucial event at 14 for you. Can you tell us about that?
The jazz pianist thought it would be fun to get a teenage boy to learn a piece of music which was harmonically complex. It's called Tenderly by an American composer by the name of Walter Gross. And it took me ages to learn it. It was really difficult, but then eventually I was entered into a talent quest and won, and was flown to Sydney from Brisbane to play on a nighttime national television show. So that was very exciting, very different type of music. But I'll play a part of it for you.
Awesome, as our team
Yes.
say. It's just beautiful. Thank you so
It's
much.
been a friend for over 50
Yeah.
years.
Can you imagine a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old playing that? It's kind of beyond my capabilities to even imagine. That's something. Oh. So then we move on into high school, and this morning at breakfast I had to ask something that I didn't understand. In high school you were a prefect, and I had no idea what a prefect is. Some of you say, indicate. So first you were a prefect, and
Yeah.
so can you tell us about what that
A
is?
prefect was a student chosen by the student body, but the teachers had power of veto. If you were roustabout, you might not make it, but it was a position of privilege and leadership in the school. You had to dress very neatly and check out other kids for infringements of uniform. So I was actually the only prefect at my school who didn't play football. I did debating and played the piano at speech night. And nerdy was a good description, I would think. Yeah.
Mm. Now, you then got involved with youth leadership kinds of things. And can you,
That's
like to
true.
hear about that, what that
That's
was.
true. We're in a Jewish community in Queensland, and there was a movement called Beitar, which got kids together and taught them about various things that were exciting at the time. We got to wear a uniform. We got to be on guard duty and hang out with girls at night time at camp. It was basically a training program for life.
I see.
But it was really important, and that's where I actually originally met my very dear wife, Anne, whom we can introduce shortly.
Yes.
But she
You
was...
can right now.
We could, actually. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to introduce my very lovely wife.
Please stand up, Annie.
Anne Bennett.
Yeah, thank you. I should have said she is a major part of the story here, so I wanted everyone to see Anne, and she comes up repeatedly in the tale, so
she does.
it's very important.
She's hung around with
Yes,
me
she has.
for a long time. But I guess the story of our meeting, we knew each other in a mild sort of way, but Anne's best friend was my girlfriend at the time. And there were a lot of photographs of me with this lovely girl called Nonny, who was we were an item from when I was about 13 or so. Nothing much happened, of course, with her, but I mean, we were supposedly together. And in the photographs of me with her, Anne would always be slightly to the left and behind, with her, sparkling eyes, just always there. And then on one very fateful evening, when I guess she was about 16 or 17, Nonny invited me over to help celebrate her birthday at her house. And Anne was there, and I was quite annoyed that, this other person was there. But at the end of the evening, since she lived close by, I offered her a lift home. And she didn't make it for a long time to her house. I don't know what happened. I don't know who started it, really. It was a sort of a takeover. And then, many years later, but I was about 20 at the time, and Anne was about 17. I think that's about right. And that's been a very long-lasting relationship, and with 4 wonderful offspring. Could introduce our children just briefly now.
Yes, please.
We have 4 children. They're all very different. 2 girls and 2 boys, in the order girl, boy, girl, boy. We've had our issues with all of them. They've ended up wonderful. They permit me, with great tolerance, to tell stories of our experiences when they were adolescent. By the way, I was invited to write a book called Growing Pains about adolescence for parents, the first time I'd written in that genre. And my children, aged at the time about 17, 15, 13, 12, whatever, said that they were immediately going to start on a sequel called My Father the Hypocrite. And they still believe that. But lovely memories of my children growing up. My youngest son was probably the one that acted up a little bit. I mean, I can remember a dinner party, a very important dinner party, because in those days you invited people to the home that you wanted to impress. And he's sitting opposite me at the end of this table, and I said, Nate, would you mind going and getting something from the kitchen? And he said, why don't you sit on that and swivel? And I don't know how I'm going to handle this. Yeah, he was also the one where I said, Nathan, why are you behaving like this? He said, you're the bloody expert, you figure it out. The other source of anecdotes is really my younger daughter, Sari, who's an amazing athlete, a kung fu expert and a very physically fit young person. And I did believe that you could have conversations with kids if you were doing things together. So we were in parallel, as they recommend, washing up together one day, and she was a teenager at the time. And she suddenly said to me, Dad, you know what I've been thinking? I'm ready to do it. And I broke 3 dishes. And I paused for a moment. I said, sweetheart, don't do it. It'll drain all the energy away from your brain and you'll fail your exams. It's all I could think of at the time. And she said, oh, okay, Dad. But I figured out later she was kidding me. She just wanted to know what I'd said. Yeah. Yeah. We weren't going to say that we've had 3 weddings and 2 divorces, no.
No, right. So to get back to Annie, it was Franz Liszt that really did the trick, though, I understand.
Oh, yes. There was a particular piece that I was practicing at the time that made her go weak in the knees and she had to lie down.
That'll do it.
So if I do play a page or so of this piece, anyone who's nearby might need to catch her. Right.
Do more than a page, too.
Yeah, this piece of music, which I got out for this occasion, is the Petrarchan sonnet. It's called Sonetta 104 del Petrarca by Franz Liszt. He was travelling in Italy, and the series of music, these were called the Years of Pilgrimage. You did one in Switzerland, one in Italy. And this particular piece is based on a Petrarchan sonnet that is full of passion and anguish and suffering. But it also has a very lovely message. So shall I give it a go?
Oh, please. Thank you so much. And Petrarch was the founder of the Renaissance. He was a very significant person in poetry and beginning of a humanistic move.
You'll get a sense of it. It's challenging.
you all right? Okay. That's lovely. Thank you so much. Then we come.
Is this too exhausting?
It is. I'm hanging onto the stool. Then we come to your 15 years of age and 15 to 17. And you're all involved with music at 15. Can you tell us about that transitional period with your mother, particularly?
Oh, my mother, the nurse.
Yes.
I think my mother nursed only for a few years, but even now she says, you know, you remember I'm a nurse. She's 90 years old, and she couldn't remember that she'd already had a Panadol, and I said, Mum, I'm putting this on the plate so that you'll remember this later. She said, I am a nurse, you know.
Oh,
anyway, my mother, the nurse, thought that medicine would be a better career for a nice Jewish boy, and wouldn't permit me to leave Brisbane and come to Sydney and train in music, which was a very good thing. It turned out to be a very good thing. So I've had a wonderful career in medicine. But that was a transition in which I had the parallel options and then thought this would be the way to go. The advantage being, of course, that you know you can come back to music at any time in your life and it can still be important. But the nature of the career that we have is so special that I have no regrets at all.
Can you jump ahead? This is a big jump to what's happened recently with your certifications and all. It is so major to just jump into another. I think I'm scratching something here.
Coming back to music more seriously a decade ago, I think in the context of feeling quite...
Okay, thank you. Thanks, I'm sorry.
I had a very old piano, an English Challen piano that was not really any great shakes. And since I was feeling so miserable in general, Anne said, why don't we invest in a new piano? So on weekends we would go to showrooms and have a look at them. We found some wonderful instruments, way beyond our pocket. But there was one I could afford, but unfortunately it was 7 feet long, and she said, no way, Jose. But I think with a brand new piano, and it was quite special, at least I was told it was special, it was a Millennium edition of Kauai. It was in the R series, which was a better brand, a better style of piano. And they said that they had made 2,000 in the Millennium year, in the year 2000, and that it had an Italian soundboard made of the same wood that Stradivarius used for violins in the forests of Italy. It's probably bullshit, but that's it certainly sounds as if it has a good soundboard. And then having a brand new piano and thinking, well, maybe there's a way to take advantage of this. So I went back to very regular lessons and then had the idea that I would do the exams that I hadn't done as a child, and started to practice the first one diploma and then the second. And I think it's fair to say that this was a very grueling decade for my wife, because the involvement in music that's not always tuneful, not always tuneful. So we had to work out this practice schedule. If I was playing what she called the killer bee music, then she would be out of the house, or I'd have to play, you know, at some appropriate time. But that was a very big challenge, because to master 4 works and then another 4 works, and try and fit practice into the cracks of a life, because the daily job didn't get any less in a way. So I became obsessed, and I can remember feeling irritated because Anne said, this is not a hobby, it's an obsession. I said, no, it's a hobby. And then I agree, actually, now, it was an obsession. But there was no other way to get through. So the first graduation ceremony had this grey-haired man sitting amidst a sea of high school students, mostly Chinese. I think I was the only grey-haired, white-faced person in the entire room. All these very, very talented kids coming up to get this diploma. And the guy who was making the speech at that award ceremony was actually a teacher that I had been to see at the con, a wonderful pianist himself. And he was so blown away by the fact that this man in his 60s had done this exam that he made his whole speech around it's never too late for music, and he was challenging people to go find your creative self. It doesn't matter how old you are. So that was good. And then, but doing the next exam was probably a bit excessive because that was even harder. And we got through it. I'm glad it's behind me because I can now go back to tuneful music and just play for pleasure.
Amazing. Let's go back to medicine. And at 17, you were a medical student.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, 17, 18.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And Murray Williams then comes into your medical life.
Very much so. Those of you who've heard of Murray Williams, he was the very first Australian doctor to train in adolescent medicine. He came in the late 50s and again in 61 to Boston. And he worked with Gallagher himself. And he tried very hard in Australia to promote the idea that adolescents were special medically. And no one took a lot of notice of him. But he was the student health doctor at the University of Queensland at the time. And I think I became really interested in what he was reporting on in regard to this field, a very new and emerging field. And he was my doctor while I was hypochondriacally involved with my life during those years. By the way, that's a nice good news and bad news joke. Have you heard that one? The doctor says to his patient, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is you're not a hypochondriac. Anyway. He was a very special man, and I think it was the quality of his listening, the way he elicited a history and the way he seemed so focused and interested on you as a person impressed me. And I went on to do adult medicine, internal medicine, but having finished that, I went back to talk to him. And I said, can you explain to me what's involved in adolescent medicine, and could you help me find somewhere to train? Which he duly did. He wrote a lot of letters on my behalf, and he found a number of places that had fellowships. Very few had funded positions with stipends. And the one position that was available was with Bill Daniel. I think somebody had dropped out or died on the way or something happened. And he offered me the job, but it was the most amazing whirlwind sort of correspondence. I said, I've just graduated as a physician and I'd like to come. And he says, when can you come? And I think within a couple of months we'd packed up 2 small kids and we'd headed off to the States. When we came through customs the first time and said where we were going, one guy turned to the other and says, Alabama, is that still part of the United States? But I must say, with Murray's support and mentorship, I got introduced to adolescent medicine through Bill. Mm-hmm. Our reflections are that I did actually visit Richard Mackenzie on the way through. Oh, yeah. And when I said you're the very first person I met, Dick, that would have been in 1974, which was when I came across. A very interesting time. We'd never been away as a family. It's a way to grow up, to actually leave home. And it was a strange and wonderful experience to arrive in Birmingham, Alabama. In fact, we had a very interesting first meal with Bill and Jean. It looked interesting on the plate. I think it was chicken, but it was wrapped in meat of some sort. And you know, Anne and I were keeping kosher, sort of, and we didn't know what it was. We didn't want to embarrass him at all. So we spent the evening dissecting the red meat off the white meat, and it was sort of all around the plate. And it looked terrible, the mess that we left. He didn't say anything, absolutely poker face, but in the car on the way to work the next day, he said, what on earth were you doing with your dinner? And I said, well, we don't eat ham. He says, it wasn't ham, it was chipped beef, you idiot. So, he was a very entertaining man. I don't know how many people know Bill Daniel or knew him, but the experience, and I know that Bob was very close with him, and Dick and others, and Bob Brown, who took over from me when I left in '76. But it was like being welcomed into somebody's family. It didn't feel like he was a stranger who was your boss. He was a person you called Bill. Mm-hmm. And just reflecting back and talking to Bob Brown yesterday, so much of what I learnt that started me on the way to an academic career as well was learnt at his feet. He wrote well, he he spoke well, he advocated well, he got grants. He was a very wonderful and influential man. He was quite distressed when I said I was going back to Australia. He thought that I would stay. Mm-hmm. And we had a third child in Birmingham, a natural childbirth that took for about 56 hours. And it was quite a hairy experience. But with the third child, Anne said to me one day, I'm going to take the family home and show the new baby to the family. And what was I telling you about?
Well, about the piano.
Oh, well, yeah, she hired me a piano so I wouldn't get a mistress, but apart... Oh, no, I know. Okay. And then I followed 6 weeks later and then met the person who employed me at the Children's Hospital in Sydney. And when I came back, I can remember sitting in a pizza parlour and saying to Bill, I've been offered a job in Sydney. He said, does that mean you're leaving? I said, yes, I'll stay till July and then I have to go back. And he basically just sat there stunned with tears rolling down his cheeks. And it was quite a sad moment for me, really. He'd thought that I might perhaps stay. But Anne said it would be a long commute for me if so we did go home. Yeah.
During your years in Alabama, then you started the Society for Adolescent Medicine during that time, was it?
I did. I joined immediately. In fact, the very first meeting I came to was in San Francisco.
Yes.
It was so exciting. I could hardly stay in the meeting. I wanted to be on the trams. And they had pornography, which I hadn't seen before.
You hadn't seen before.
In fact, Rod Schenker took me to see this very soft R-rated movie.
Oh, really?
It was very exciting. Yeah, and I can remember coming down into the toilet, and it was very tense. There were sort of statuesque men standing around, and no one was speaking. And I just stood in the middle of them for a moment, and then said, "No way," and I just ran back out. But that's my memory of San Francisco.
The sum total.
It was a good meeting.
Okay, yeah. It was. We had quite a party, I remember.
They tell me.
Yeah. So then we'll go on to Sydney and your career beginning there then.
Yeah. The very first hospital to start adolescent medicine was the Royal Alexandra Hospital for Children in Sydney. And as I understand it, there was starting to be some discussion about what are we going to do with chronically ill kids when they become adolescent. So the paediatricians were starting to think about it. And the deputy head of the hospital, his name was John Yu, a very powerful figure in paediatrics, went on to become Australian of the Year in 1996. And a colleague in Birmingham from Sydney mentioned that I was training and told him about it. And when I went back to visit, he just literally offered me the job. He said, would you like to come and start an adolescent unit? And a colleague by the name of Suzanne Robertson and I were employed at the same time to set that up. Mm-hmm. But that was the first hospital to do that. And there was opposition and scepticism about it. It wasn't embraced. It was seen to be odd.
And it got attention, media attention, you said.
Well, it did at the time because it was so strange. But media attention was a problem because in those days you weren't allowed to publicise anything to do with your career as a doctor.
Oh, that's right.
And I can remember a visit from a very somberly suited man from the Australian Medical Association to reprimand me because I'd done an interview about the new unit.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, what is your objection to this? I said, I'm a full-time salaried specialist. And he said, well, maybe one day you'll go into private practice and you'll have an unfair advantage because they'll know you. And I thought, well, that sucks. So I resigned from the AMA.
Yeah. So I went over his CV. His CV is many pages. It's not a description of the specific things. It's categories. 50 of these, 45 of this, 25 certain, and 110 presentations or something. It goes on and on like this with these categorical descriptions of all of his activity. It's enormous what you've done. It is just amazing. I'm just daunted. And poor Anne.
Look, I think anyone who gets to be hanging around in a field for a long time, does a lot because things keep happening.
Yes, sure.
I must say that the joy of the work is not actually only one aspect. It's the people that come together, and I think adolescent medicine attracts wonderful people, altruistic people, and our team is particularly good at being a team. So there are a number of my colleagues from our team who've come today. I won't name them, but I'm feeling very, very aware that they're here. And I want to send a thanks to all my colleagues for their support of my career and also just being part of what we do.
Yeah. I know when we were talking about this, you were wanting to recognize various people, and by the end of the thing, most everyone would be on their feet.
I know. Would you just all stand up?
So your connection.
That's true.
So, yeah. So there's so many things that you've done.
I cut my finger off.
Well, we have to. That's good. Let's go to that. Yes, that's right. But we can come back to these other things. But yeah, let's hear about the finger.
Yeah,
because that's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, I have some experiences that I'd rather not remember. But on one occasion, on a Saturday morning in the early 1980s, we were wondering what we'd do with the day, I think. And I tripped on the cap and sat in a pot plant and flung my hand through a plate glass window and severed the top of my third right finger. And I stood there with blood pouring onto the floor, and I was saying, Anne, it's my best finger, it's my best finger. And she found that very entertaining and started to laugh. And she said to the children, all four of them, all three of them at the time, she said, children, put on your shoes, go downstairs and find your father's finger, because it had fallen out the window into the garden below. And our young son, who must have been about 10 at the time, Adam, had just got new glasses, and he, little eagle eyes, and he said, I found it. And he came upstairs with this little shriveled piece of tissue covered in dirt. And the end of that story is that we found a surgeon. There was a surgeon strike, but we found a surgeon in a far-flung little hospital, and he sewed it back on and gave me a better result than I might have had. But the irony of the timing was that I got involved with a piano teacher and a group of musicians that came together for soiree evenings, and that's the only musical environment I've played in. And there was a concert 2 weeks after this accident. And I thought, oh, well, I'm off the hook. I'll just relax. Anyway, she turned up, my teacher, Maureen, at the front door with a left-handed piece by Scriabin, and I thought I might play that to you. It's very brief.
It is. Thank you.
Bandages, right? Yeah.
Ravel did some pieces for the left hand, you were telling me.
He did, yeah, particularly in the First World War. People lost their arms, and he wrote an entire piano concerto for someone called Liechtenstein. But there's a number of left-handed pieces in the repertoire.
Based on the loss of extremity.
Yeah, they're not all miserable and sad. And
No.
no.
This one has a tone poem set.
Yeah,
sadness to
it's
it.
nice. Yeah,
It
and
is
I
beautiful.
think that's one of the functions of music. Really, you can evoke in yourself the feelings that go with the music. Did that make you really sad? Yeah. We should cheer them up.
Oh, you ready to do that right now?
I don't know.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. There's such a list of things in Australia. I just want to read these, and then you can comment on what you want or something. In the 80s, it's just a long list, and I just the Sydney Adolescent Medical Unit, the School-Based Adolescent Service in Melbourne, the Canberra with Murray Williams, the Australian Association of Adolescent Health and federal funding in 1978. Multidisciplinary NGO on youth health in the region, the first national conference at Sydney, chairing of the WHO regional meeting on adolescent health in Manila, expert witness working group in Geneva with Bob Blum, and Michael was there. International Symposium on Adolescent Health in Sydney, that brought a lot of attention here. And Joe Sanders was involved with that, and our friend Herb Friedman. And then the IAAH, Murray Williams was the first president of that. So it's just, this is just a little bit of a list. Yeah. You might comment on some of those.
I think while I was in the United States, the first international meeting was held in Helsinki in '74, because shortly after I arrived, Bill Daniel went off there. And then there was one in Washington in '76, again in '79. And so I became aware that there was an international movement. And then when I was back in Australia in 1980, there was a WHO meeting in Manila, which I was invited to attend. And it really opened my eyes to the issues of developing countries. Previously, I think we're so blinkered in terms of what Western kids are experiencing. And that was a wonderful experience. And then I became interested in WHO. And then in '84, I met Bob in that year. And that was also the year of a very important meeting in Geneva, which I also attended. And subsequent to that meeting, the General Assembly was on, the technical discussions at the General Assembly was on the health of youth. And that was a fabulous meeting. I remember Anna-Melly Monroy trained the young people who acted out scenarios, and it was done very creatively.
Really?
I don't know if that was the year that you were on sabbatical, Bob. Was it 89 or 88? 87, 8. But it sparked my interest. At the General Assembly, it was recommended that an adolescent health program be created in Geneva. And it did subsequently come about, and Herb and Jane Ferguson were part of that early period. Bob was the very first person in adolescent medicine who did a sabbatical with WHO and worked with those guys. And I became interested in doing that as well. So Anne and I and our two younger children spent 6 months in Geneva with World Health. And that was a very, very formative time for me as well.
How was that?
Well, it was the beginnings of the International Association. We'd had a meeting in Sydney in '87,
Right.
and that's where it was established. There was a foundation charter signed at that meeting, and Joe Sanders was there representing SAHM, and Herb Friedman from WHO was there, and many people in the society came to that meeting, and IAAH was born. Very heady and exciting years to establish something like that. Diana was one of the foundation members on the very first council, Manny Shigia, Anna-Melly, other people whose names are iconic in the field, became involved, and WHO became very supportive of it. In fact, we became officially connected with WHO as an international organisation during the time that I was president. Which was about '89 to '93, which is when I got ill, so we stopped.
Right.
Yeah.
One person that I really regret not having been able to interview was Herb Friedman. I was just in the process of trying to do that, and then he passed away. And
he did, yeah.
So, and he was such a wonderful, I mean, we do lose some that we haven't had a chance
know.
to really introduce to everyone.
I was thinking about this man. He kept his personal life very close to his chest. He was an entertaining man, very interesting man to work with, and I can remember waking up one day and seeing an email from him on my computer with the subject, "Not good news, re-health." And it was just a very simple explanation that he was dying. He didn't actually say that. He was very positive about what he was doing, enjoying his job, his work in London at the time. And then he died very, very quickly after that. But he did say towards the end of his message, and we'd never discussed it, I don't think, but he said, "I was always impressed with the way you handled your own difficulty." And he was making reference to a bout of cancer that I had in the early 90s. So we had that sort of empathic connection around that experience. But he was a courageous man, I think, in the way he handled it.
He'd come, when we started the qualitative research group here, he was one of the early speakers, maybe the first actually, talking about his work, qualitative work, yeah. Well, maybe we'll move into the 90s now. And again, there's a long list of things that you did. I want to hear about the Cell Block Youth Health Service.
Okay. Adolescent medicine well established from 1978. By 1990, we had an outpatient program, a ward, and I was really interested in the kids that didn't make it to traditional services. And we'd become aware of the Door, a centre of alternatives in New York. And in the early 80s, we were thinking that it would be really good in Australia to have one-stop shop types of services based in the community. And we even experimented with having a youth outreach worker that would go and try and engage kids on the street. And very much influenced by my knowledge of what was going on in Los Angeles at Dick's program. We started to focus our attention on high-risk youth. And the hospital had been given a police station, a derelict police station, and didn't know what to do with it. And then somebody at some point said, "Well, maybe we can give it to David and maybe he'll know what to do with it." So at the time, the Minister for Health was also the Minister for Arts. And in very short order, we put together a proposal, a submission, that we have funding for a youth health service that would include the arts. So we hired not only more traditional health professionals, but we hired the coordinator of that service was a dancer, choreographer, as well as a psychologist. And Peter Chown, who's very well known in the field, was the first health educator, but also a saxophonist. And the artist was a guitarist. And a lot of the work that was done with the street kids was around the use of art, poetry, putting poetry to music, depicting life scenarios through visual art. And that service became iconic in Sydney and became the model for other similar services. It really gave birth to what we now know as the youth health model, which is very much about diversity of services. So that police station had 2 cells at the back, and we set it up as a youth health service. It's fallen on hard times more recently, but it was quite special at the time. It opened in 1990.
Mm-hmm. One thing, getting to the cancer, which is 1993, that you wrote, which is just lovely, that Anne's love and laughter therapy was so important, and that's really very wonderful. And a Buddhist monk.
Yes. Yes, I got to know a Buddhist monk really well, and went on retreats. And I think my own concern was that cancer had some relationship to dis-ease in my life, and I certainly set out to understand that. This particular monk, he was an Australian who trained in Thailand in the Buddhist tradition, and he worked with people who were dying, hospice work, but also specialised in health professionals with serious illness, and would take retreats, silent retreats, which were really profoundly interesting. I learned a lot about Buddhism as a tradition not incompatible with other traditions at all, and became quite good at meditating, although I was quite obsessive about it. And I'd say, oh my God, I'm late for meditation, or, I have to rush off somewhere and relax. But I like this monk because he was very down to earth, and I can remember in this beautiful country scene, we were all silent and, spiritual, and I saw him walking down the street with a cigarette and a telephone in his ear. That was my sort of guy. But interestingly, the meditation practice, which I know people benefit from enormously, was replaced really by music, and the practice is meditative in a way. You activate your right brain, you're focused but aware and not able to worry. It's like you were saying about gardening before. It's important. But Anne's love and laughter got me through. We took time off, in fact probably one of the best times we had, because I just was too ill to go to work. And Anne gave up a job for a period of almost 3 months, and we're like honeymooners again, like are we going to die? Well, I didn't die, anyway. Well, it would have been a terrible loss.
Interviewing a ghost here. You received an award that I didn't quite understand, a AO award.
Yes, Australia, like Canada and other countries, honours people for community service of different sorts. And there are different categories. There's Companion of the Order of Australia, and I got an officer in the General Division.
Officer?
Yeah, that's the second highest level in the order. And it came at a really good time for me. I was, quite worried about my life and my health. And it was basically a matter of having helped establish a field in the country. And I'm aware that Murray Williams had nominated me for that award, and he subsequently received one as well. But it was a very nice feeling to be recognised for that. And it's like being a big fish in a small pond, isn't it? You set something up, and then it grows from there. But I was one of the earliest in the field, so that was good.
Good. And other things, just to list, a North Southwest, what NSW? What's that? New South Wales. New South Wales Centre for the Advancement of Adolescent Health, and CAAH.
Well, that's what CAAH stands for, Centre for the Advancement of Adolescent Health.
Okay.
So this was really a public health initiative arising out of our department. And the idea was that we would have an impact beyond our clinical service if we embraced support for research and training and advocacy and policy development. And it became, over the past 10 years, quite an important technical resource, focusing particularly on people in primary health care. But the idea was to create an evidence base for primary health care and then assist people to do a better job. We're trying to capture the hearts and minds of GPs. As general practitioners are the mainstay of primary health care in Australia. And we've recently been invited to develop a new youth health policy for the state. I was very interested in Bob Blum's session yesterday on advocacy and the importance of nurturing relationship with government, which is what we did. The government has funded our centre, but they also now trust us to represent the sector and develop a policy, which has been informed by many young people in very creative ways. But that's going to be launched later this year during what's called the Youth Parliament. The Parliament's taken over by young people. It's under the auspice of the YMCA, but the Minister for Health and maybe other dignitaries will come. And there are not many states in Australia that have a very well developed youth health policy. We have no national policy at the moment. So that's what that is.
Well, it's an amazing track record that's resulting in these kind of things then happening. So,
so you mentioned the department and the centre, and the next major development was the establishment of a chair of adolescent medicine. It's currently filled by Professor Kate Steinbeck, who's present as well.
Can you stand up? There. Yeah, good. Okay.
This is a very nice evolution because University of Sydney, a very prestigious university, set out to raise the money required and has made a commitment to a field when others were really bidding to have chairs established. They supported us, and I think that's a very, very encouraging thing for our field.
Let's see. Sue Towns and her work. Can you talk
Well,
about Sue?
Sue Towns is very noteworthy in the scene because she was our first fellow and kept running off to have babies. But kept coming back and then became a staff specialist. But I can remember going to every birth that Sue had. She used to pop out these little blonde-haired children. They all looked the same. I said, "Oh, Sue, it's another one." She had 4 beautiful blonde-haired children. But Sue actually put her parenting ahead of her career in a way, and plugged along for many years, and then about 5 years ago took over as head of department. And I'm really sorry she couldn't make it. Her father's very ill, and she's had to stay at home for that reason. But both Sue and Michael Cohen and other colleagues in the department, we've actually worked together bringing our special skills and different skills to bear, and now adding Kate into the mix again, having started with us some time ago, is now back. So we feel we've got a very strong department, very collegiate department, and also very close relationships with Westmead Hospital and Simon Clark, who was the other pioneer in New South Wales. There are other pioneers in Victoria, of course, happening in parallel. But we feel very encouraged by these developments, Dick. We nearly got to the end of my career in life, haven't we? What happens when the interview finishes?
Well,
my life
actually,
doesn't finish, does it?
What I thought is you have another piece you can play, and I thought we would have some time for I mean, there's so many people here that are close to you and know you and everything that I think I will
Okay. Shall I
give an
play
opportunity.
first?
Yes, and people then can respond and comment and
Okay.
ask questions and all.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Well, the piece I thought I would play as a finish piece is a piano transcription of a flute sonata by Bach. It's called Siciliano, and it was arranged by Willem Kempf, wonderful German concert pianist. And it's a simple melody, but actually a very beautiful experience for me.
Yeah, beautiful. Just amazing. Just wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's a pleasure. It's made me nervous.
You're pretty cool. So I want to just open for discussion and comments, questions. At this time, we have a few minutes. And if people need to leave, that's fine, but I want to make this opportunity. Lissa.
Yes, thank you, Dick, and thank you very much, David. What an elegant opportunity for all of us. I wondered if you have any thoughts about the convergence of medicine and music. People often have those dual interests, and I think there's some hypotheses, but I'm wondering if you've reflected on that.
I don't know that I understand it, but I do agree with you. I think there is a very close relationship. There are very few doctors that I know who don't love music, and I guess classical music in particular. There's a doctor's orchestra in Australia, which is of a very high standard. They don't need lots of pianists, but they've got lots of other things. There is a medical humanities course in Australia, and now you can graduate in both medicine and music simultaneously at the University of Sydney through the Conservatorium. I've often thought that had I been around now as a student, that's really what I would have done. I'm not sure what sort of double career that can lead to. But
Yours.
yeah. But yes, it's a very common thing, isn't it? I mean, if we were to ask a straw poll here, how many people love music, it would be unusual not to, wouldn't it?
I guess so. I had Belbon Steele Sorensen for 7 years, and it was in this big old house every week. It was not a great pleasure, actually, for me. But I did learn to play a bit and enjoy it.
You going to play for us, Dick?
Oh, no. Evelyn. No, I've been in Brazil conferences, and I hear music there, too. I remember...
The best was, well, once Dr. Bennett invited me to go to Australia, but then he came to Brazil.
Oh.
And then he came to Rio de Janeiro, and then I wanted to be, and I say, what would you like to do in Rio? And he said, yeah. I need to get some Tom Jobim partitures for piano. And I said, what? So I have to look where in Rio we could find the piano for Tom Jobim. So he got that. I hope you trained that Tom Jobim once you got back.
But you took me to a wonderful jazz club called Mistura Fina.
Yeah,
I still have the plate which we stole from him.
Yeah. Yes. Bob.
David. David and I go back, I think, after Dick McKenzie and Bob Blum were maybe commensurate with Bob, but I think I've known him longest from this country. David was one of the reasons I went into adolescent medicine. I don't know if he knows that or not, but I mean, I was considering going for a fellowship with Bill Daniel, and the thing that clinched it was the fact that David was going to be there. After I met him in the 76 International meeting in Washington, when I was in the Air Force. And so my wife and I take this drive down to Alabama, which of course everybody we knew thought meant that we were falling off the end of the earth. And we decided to drive by David's house. We had his address. And we drive by, and there are all these boxes and cartons on the lawn in a moving van. David hadn't mentioned that he was leaving.
Oh.
So we had I was looking forward to the opportunity of working with and collaborating with David. And it's interesting how things come around, because this year David and I finished working together as co-editors of the International Amstars edition that just came out. And now I feel great that we've been able to do this after all these years, but I also realize how much I've missed by not being able to work with David all these years. But at least we got this chance.
Thank you, Bob. Actually, you called to mind when we first arrived in Birmingham, Alabama, and we were invited over to Bill and Jean Daniels' place. And Anne's mother and sister were visiting, so that there were us, our 2 children, and Anne's mum and sister. And we turned up at the house And I knocked on the door, and this woman came and let us in. And I kissed her on the cheek, and we all went in and sat down. And she said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, we've come for afternoon tea with the Daniels." She said, "They live next door."
Oh, gee. That's great. Whoa. Well, again, Anne, you're a major part of all this story. If you have any comments or anything about what's gone on all this time. Yeah, I say. Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really important about David for
Yeah.
a lot of us who came along slightly after that time is that you've always been so welcoming to everybody that you run into at SAHM, and it's just astonishing to hear about all the stuff you've done, and to know that you've just always taken time for people as they join the organization, and whether it's just meeting you in the elevator or whatever. I can't remember how I met you, but you're one of the people I always really look forward to seeing at SAHM every year, and it's a real gift to be able to do
Thank you,
that.
Miriam. Well, the most noteworthy time when I met you was when you were invited to New Zealand as a keynote speaker. And in New Zealand, people sing. And I know that you just moved away from your organised presentation and you sang a song at the beginning of your keynote. I thought, there's a blue-haired person with guts.
Good. Well, Dick, do you have any comments at all?
Well, I'm holding back.
Are you? Okay.
David and I have been friends for so long that
Yes.
I've seen David's growth over the years.
We're talking 36 years, actually.
Is that right?
36
Yeah.
years. Actually,
Yeah.
my first contact with David was when I first became the division head in Los Angeles, and David was on his way through to go to Alabama. And when I found out that David was also from medicine rather than pediatrics, and I'm from internal medicine myself, I thought, here's a great recruit. And so I spent the whole afternoon trying to talk David into staying in Los Angeles. And I almost had him. I think I almost had him. And he said, no, he's got to go to Alabama. He's made the commitment there, so off he went. But every time he came through Los Angeles, he would drop off and spend some time in Los Angeles with me and my program. And we were very, very delighted to have him and to see his growth along the way. And then when he sort of made things happen in Australia, he allowed me to come over and join and see what he had done over there and to get to know Murray a little better. And it was really just, it was a growth period in my career, because it was an opportunity for me to see how adolescent medicine could have a greater impact internationally. I had mostly been doing my work in the U.S. And when I went to Australia, I was really impressed by what you can do and what the need was. And so that broadened my horizon. And so it's been a wonderful 36 years, David.
Well, next year, the conversation will be with Iris Litt in Seattle. That's planned, so looking forward to that. But this was just wonderful. Thank you so much for everything. Good.
Did we do the hour? What is the time?